So the first thing we're going to take a look at doing that's a little bit different to what we've done previously is using a sprite sheet in the game. So down here we have an image that has the various bricks we're going to use for our game. We've got a paddle down here, and then we've got a little ball down the bottom. Now at the moment, if we were to drop this into our scene, it'll just drop all three pieces in, which is obviously no use to us. We want to have it broken out into separate pieces. So one of the handy things in Unity is that when we have a sheet of sprites like this, we can chop it up into multiple bits and use those individual pieces as objects within the world. So as a demonstration, we're going to break or set up this sprite sheet into multiple pieces. So what we do is in the inspector here, when we have our brick paddle ball sprite sheet selected, if we go to sprite mode, we're going to set that to be multiple. We're going to go down here to filter mode, and instead of saying bilinear, we're going to set it to point, and that'll make sure we have sharp textures. If we set it to different filters, we can end up with blurry textures and stuff like that, which we don't want because these are 2D objects that we want drawn properly in the world. If we go down to max size here, we want to set this to be close to whatever the size of the sprite sheet is. And you can see if you look down here, the size of our sprite sheet is 128 by 128, so we want to use 128 here. You want to use the lowest number above what your sprite sheet is. So say if your sprite sheet was 129 by 129, you'd want to use 256. You always want to go the next lowest number above whatever the longest edge of your sprite sheet is, basically. But ours is 128, so we can use 128. For compression, we don't want to use any compression. We want it to be absolutely perfectly the way it is. And with all those settings set, we can hit apply. And then now that it's a multiple sprite sheet, we can go into the sprite editor here and we can chop it up into different pieces. So we've got these three different pieces here, and there's multiple ways to chop up sprite sheets. You can do it automatically. You can do it by, say if you have an evenly spaced, say you've got a sheet of character movements, you can chop it up into a grid of different objects, or you can do like this and just click and drag, and it'll create a box just like that around whatever area you draw, and that'll create the objects that we want to use. So this is going to be just one of our bricks, so it'll just be a brick. Right here we're going to draw around our little paddle, and we're going to call it paddle. And then finally down here we're going to draw this around our ball. Now you can see there I didn't quite draw around it properly at the top, so if I zoom in, what you can do is click and drag the box like this to make sure that you're fitting around to the edges of whatever object you have just perfectly. So you can readjust it after you've drawn the first box, which is a very handy and helpful thing. So we're going to obviously call this our ball. A small a, there we go. So we're going to apply the changes we just made like this, and then we're going to close out of this little window. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to drag the ball into the scene here, and I'm going to drag the paddle in down here. Now at the moment we've got our paddle down here and it's quite small, and our ball is quite small too. And that's because by default when we import a sprite sheet, it sets the pixels per unit to be 100. And basically what that means, if we switch back to our scene view here, you see these little blocks in the background. Each one of those is 1 unit of the screen. So if you have an image with 100 pixels per unit, that means every 100 pixels of that image will show up as one of these blocks. So at the moment that's set a little bit too high for what we have here. We're going to adjust it and set it to be 64 pixels per unit, and if we hit apply now, we'll see our images in the center will get bigger. So I'm going to hit apply, and there we go, our images suddenly get bigger just like that. So you can adjust the pixels per unit relative to how you want to use them in your own game, but we want to set them up so by default they all go to be this size. And of course you can manually make your objects bigger within your game by growing and shrinking them in the hierarchy over here, or in the normal controls over here. But you ideally want to keep all your sprites on a consistent pattern. So that's why you'd want to know what value you're importing your sprites in with and try and be consistent and stick with that to keep everything in relative scale to each other. Okay, so we've got our ball and our paddle in our scene here, so let's drag in a brick as well. And Now, of course, all these objects are going to need to be able to interact with other things within the world. So we've already set up the walls to be having box colliders. So let's do the same now for our bricks and our ball. So for the brick, we're going to give it a box collider 2D. For the paddle, we're also going to give it a box collider 2D. But for the ball, we're going to give it a circle collider, which is another one of the basic 2D components. Actually, I'll just delete this here. So so we can have a look. If we don't type in anything into the search bar, you can also navigate to any items by going through the list here. So we're looking at physics 2D objects. So we're going to go into physics 2D, and you can see there's a list of all the various different physics 2D pieces you can use within Unity. So what we want to select is the circle collider right there. And if we zoom in on our circle, you can see that we've now created a little green outline around our ball, which is representing the physical boundaries of that within the world. Okay, so we've got our various different pieces set up. One of the next things we want to do is make some changes to our bricks. So at the moment we've got just this one simple brick. What we want to do is add some interest into the game and make it more exciting. So we're going to do that by changing the color of this one first. I'm going to make it a nice blue brick like that. Then what I'm going to do is make this brick a prefab, because we're going to want to be making changes to how the brick operates and how the ball interacts with it, much like we did with the paddles in the previous game project. So we're going to go into our prefabs folder, drag the brick and drop it in there. And then what we're going to do is drag that back into the world here. We're going to make a few of these. So we're going to drag, say, 8 of them in like this. Like so. And then we want them to be relatively similarly positioned as well. So our original brick is at 2.7, so we'll adjust that to be 2.5 just to keep it nice and simple. So we're going to do the same with all the other bricks that got dragged in. So we're going to go 2.5 like that. And then our first brick is at minus 7 point whatever. So we're going to set it at minus 7.5, just minus 7. Yeah, just minus 7. And then say this one here, we're going to set this at minus 5. This one here we'll set it at minus 3. This one here will be minus 1. This one will just be at 1. And so on. We do all of them, making them nice and evenly spaced so they don't look like they're just being randomly thrown in there, which they have been. So once they're all in position there like that, we're also then going to make them a little bit more, or with a little bit more variety by adding some color to them. So we'll make this one sort of a pinky purple. This one can be some light blue. This one will go for an orange. It's just to make them stand out a little bit more from each other, just to add some variety into the game. So I'll make this a bit more purple. This one can be green and yellow and red. There we go. So we've got a nice little selection of various different bricks in our game. And as before, they're all prefabs, so any changes we make to this original brick can be applied to all of them without changing the color that we've now customized for their individual instances. One other thing we'll do before we go any further, at the moment we've got a lot of bricks now starting to take up space in our hierarchy, and that's not really very useful for us. So what we're going to do is create a new object. We're going to go create empty, and we'll call this bricks, and then we're going to click and drag the original brick underneath it, and we'll do the same for the other copies and drag them on top of where it says bricks like that, so they become a child of bricks, and now we can just hide that like that and we don't have it taking up all the space that it was a second ago. We'll actually do the same with our walls here as well, because there's no reason for them to be taking up space. So we'll go to our walls like this and pop that in there. There you go, we have our bricks and our walls all sorted out. Perfect. Konnichiwa.